Hello and welcome to my shop. In this video I'm going to be replacing the PCV valve or the oil separator on my 2016 Mark 7 Golf R. This process should be the same on any of the 2-liter Volkswagen or Audi motors, so that's the Golf, the GTI, Mark 7, Mark 7.5, as well as the Audi A3 and the Audi S3. My vehicle's got about 92,000 miles on it. I'm noticing some oil consumption. I've had some other issues with the car. I've seen some recommendations to replace these as early as 60 to 80,000 miles, so I'm kind of doing this as preventative maintenance. I don't have anything that's definitive that's a problem with it, but as I said, shouldn't be too difficult. You do want the engine basically cold. Mine's probably just a little bit warm, but you don't want it too hot because you are going to be working on the engine bay. I'm going to go ahead and get some things moved around and we'll get started. For this install, you will need a new PCV valve. You'll need a 10mm socket or two. You'll probably be wanting to use a small pick or some other pry tool. You'll need a set of pliers. Unfortunately, the kit does not come with any hose clamps, so you will need a small hose clamp. I'll try and put a part number in the description. And the only other thing you might need is some paper towel. You will need a low torque wrench. You're going to be torquing as low as 10 Newton meters, which is about 80 to 90 inch pounds. So you will need a low torque wrench, not pictured, but other than that, so that's about all you really need. You will also need a T30 driver bit. First step in this, real simple. If you haven't done it before, remove your engine cover. It is simply just pull up. You'll hear it pop a couple times. There's 3-4 places that it pops onto some little nubs here under the engine bay. So as I said, just pull up, set this out of the way. The PCV valve that we're going to be replacing is this part right here. There's a handful of bolts. One thing that you are going to have to do before you can access all of the parts, you are going to have to remove at least the cylinder 3 and cylinder 4 coil packs. So I'm going to go ahead and start out by removing these coil packs. I wanted to look down in here. I had an oil problem there earlier. So we're going to start out by removing these. It is a 10mm nut here and here. Those are removing your grounds. And then after that, there's 2 more 10mm that are actually holding your coil packs in. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the first 2 nuts as well as the next 2 bolts. I'm actually going to do that on all 4 just so that I have more room to move. I removed all the fasteners holding down the coil packs. Next step is going to be I'm going to remove the plugs from the coil packs themselves. Sometimes this is actually easier to do before you remove the bolts. There is a tab that you need to press up on. Sometimes it helps to push in a little bit as you lift up on that tab and then pull out. Repeat the process all the way down the line. So once those are all loose, you really don't have a lot of room to play with these. I'm going to go ahead and get them all freed up and cleared out of the way. There is a hose clamp here that you can, if you press out on this tab right here, this will release this, and it just gives you a little bit more room to move around. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to pull out these 2 coil packs. The others don't have to be removed. To do that, sometimes this is a little bit nice if the engine is a little warm, but should just require a pull up. These can be really stuck in here, but it is a pull straight up. They do make tools for this, but these have been out fairly recently and they aren't in super tight. The first time I removed these, it did take a lot of work to pull these out. So those 2 are out of the way. The reason for that, you are removing some of these fasteners and you would not be able to get to them otherwise. The next step before we remove the PCV itself, there's 2 hose connections that we're going to go ahead and prep for removal. First things first, there was this wire clamp that was on your ignition coil setup. I've gone ahead and removed that. It was around this hose or around this wire bundle and a hose that we're going to have to remove anyways. I've just pulled it off. I'm sending it out of the way. we're going to go ahead and remove this T30 up here. This one is holding on the hose that goes out to your turbo. So we're going to remove that, but we're not going to worry about this line quite yet. It'll be easier to remove once we remove the PCV. The other one is this hose here. The factory connection, if it hasn't been replaced before, is a one-time use connector, and it's going to be a lot harder to get off right now. So I'm going to disconnect the other end with a set of pliers and get this hose loose. That way we can work with this outside the car. It'll just be easier. We aren't around a bunch of things that we have to worry about. So I'm going to remove this hose clamp, remove this T30, and then the next step is actually going to be to remove the 7 T30 fasteners that hold the PCV valve on itself. These are captive fasteners. This one is not. So when you remove this one, make sure you do not drop it down into one of your coil holes. But the fasteners themselves that are holding the PCV, those are captive. So when you remove them, they'll stay with the PCV. So I'm going to remove the hose clamp, remove the bolts, and we'll come back and we'll talk about how to actually get this thing out of here. I have the PCV valve loose. All the fasteners are loose. I've got this hose disconnected. This did take a little bit of work to work loose. At this point, we're down to this last hose that has to be disconnected. I've brought the new one over just to kind of show you what we need to do. There are 2 tabs on the back of this thing that are behind the hose that are holding it in place and making sure it stays locked in. So you need to use a pry tool, a small flathead screwdriver or something, and push down on this tab as you work this hose backwards, being careful not to try and break anything or damage anything. Once again, this is why you want the engine cool, because your hand is going to be back here. I used this pry tool, worked on both sides. I actually worked on the right side first. As I said, just kind of put some downward pressure on it. At this point, as you kind of pull the PCV up and out, all you need to do is make sure that that stays out of the way. At this point, you're going to want to take a clean paper towel and wipe all the way around the sealing surface here. As you do this, wipe away from the motor so that you don't risk pushing any debris down into the motor. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up all of this. You're going to want to inspect and make sure that both of those seals remain in place. The one around the outside of this, as well as the one underneath. So I'm going to go ahead, clean all this up, and then we'll start talking about how to reassemble. One last thing that we need to do to prep before we start putting in the new PCV valve, we are reusing this hose. As I said, from the factory, this hose clamp here is a one-time use. To get this loose, take a set of pliers. If you grab across the pinch and start to rotate it back and forth, it will start to open up. There is a hook. Got to find it over here. Sometimes you can also pry under that with either a pick or a flathead, but basically you just need to keep working this back and forth, and it will start to loosen up. You can already see it starting to come loose over there. So let's see. Just takes a little bit of work. Watch your fingers. At this point, you can remove this hose from the old PCV valve. We will be installing this on the new PCV valve. Starting to reassemble. I happen to have another hose clamp that fits, that is a reusable one. So I'm going to go ahead and install this onto the hose before I install it onto the new PCV valve. Push this on, reinstall the hose clamp. I said, in a pinch, you could use something like I guess you could use a zip tie. I wouldn't really recommend it. But at this point, so I've got a hose clamp on there. So now I'm going to go reposition, get everything ready to start going back in the vehicle. One last thing before we put this in, double check and make sure there is supposed to be a new seal on the PCV valve. Just make sure that it is fully in the groove all the way around before you try and put this in. So we're going to go ahead and start to try and work this back in to the original position. You do need to get the hose for the turbo realigned and reinstalled. There we go. You'll hear it actually snap in the spot and pull out. You can pull out on it, make sure that it isn't going to go anywhere. I got to move this hose clamp, but before I go any further, I'm going to make sure that this hose gets onto this last hose barb here and connect this hose before we try and tighten anything down. So I've got my hose reconnected. I've got this hose snapped in. We're getting ready to tighten this down. This is a very low torque. It is 9 Newton meters or 80 inch-pounds. There is a tightening sequence. You're going to start with this fastener back here. You're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, over here to 5, up here to 6, and down here to 7. I'm going to have a picture up in the top right corner kind of showing this as I tighten these down. I'm going to snug these all in first just by hand, and then I'm going to come back with my torque wrench and, as I said, and hit the pattern. I've got all the fasteners snug down, so I'm going to come back. Said 80 inch-pounds or 9 Newton meters. Said we're going to start it back here at fastener number 1. So it is very, very little torque. Next up, before we start putting the coil packs back in, we have to reinstall this last fastener here. This technically has a torque spec of 4 Newton meters, which is only 35 inch-pounds. It's basically hand tight. Bear in mind, this is going into plastic. It is not going into metal, so do not go at this with like an impactor or something like that. This is a self-tapper. Said it is not a lot of torque. And we're already to torque. So at this point, the next step is we're going to reinstall the coil packs. They just push down, making sure that we can clear the electrical connector, and I pop that out the bracket. Same thing with the last one. You're just pushing straight down, making sure that those are all in place. Next up, we're going to go ahead. I'm going to hand start and snug up the 4 bolts that go into that hold the coil packs down. Once again, be very, very careful with these. They are small thread going into aluminum. It's very easy to cross thread, so don't use an impactor or anything. I've got all the coil pack bolts in. I'm going to go ahead and final tighten these. Torque spec is 10 Newton meters or about 89 inch-pounds. Once again, not crazy high torque. Next step is going to be to go ahead and get the electrical connections back made. Work your harness back in, pull down on it. You'll hear a click to each one. And you can pull back on it and make sure that it is secure. You want to make sure that's good connection. Next, we're going to reinstall the grounds on all 4 coil packs. Once again, same 10 Newton meters on the 10 millimeter nuts. You don't need to go nuts on these, no pun intended. As you tighten these down, hold your finger against the wire to make sure that it doesn't spin as you torque. One last thing to do, I had taken this wire clamp off. So I'm going to go ahead and get this reconnected on here. So at this point I have remade all of my connections. I have my harness clamp on. The coil packs are all torqued in to 10 Newton meters. The PCV valve is torqued in to the 9 Newton meters. I have reconnected the hose to the turbo, reconnected the hose over here. At this point, the only thing left is to reinstall the engine cover. Push it down, make sure it's connected. So that's it. As I said, not too bad, doesn't require a lot of tools. The biggest thing is that low torque wrench. Hopefully this kind of helps solve some of my oil consumption problems. And as I said, I'm just doing it as a general maintenance thing. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If you would, please like and subscribe my channel. Keep checking back. I'm going to be doing some more installs on this. May take it back to the track in the spring, and we'll see what happens. So once again, thanks for tuning in.